People who have seen nice people finally snap. What happened? I had just started high school, and there was a new kid. I was from a one primary one high school town, so all the kids already knew each other. He was a giant Aboriginal kid who was quiet with no friends, so my friend and I befriended him. We always chatted to him, and he was so lovely, always softly spoken, and generally just so nice. Like holding doors open for us, and bashfully smiling when we would go out of our way to be friendly to him. Anyway, he started getting picked on by the bad boy of our grade relentlessly. One day he snapped and beat him up with a garbage can, and was expelled, and I never saw him again. Bully, bullies kid. School, bullied kid fights back. School, you weren't supposed to do that. I mentioned this in another thread. Sam and friend. Happiest, most friendly guy you ever want to meet. Some guy said something about his sister, and of course it made him mad. My friend went after him and caught him. Punched about 3 times and we realized he was going to kill him. It took 3 of us normal-sized guys to hold his arm back from hitting the guy one more time. We told the other to run, like run Fing now. He did. Our friend was mad at us for a while for stopping him, then he went home. The next day it was as if nothing happened. He just went back to being a super nice guy. P.S. I forgot a couple days later our friend's big brothers, were looking for that same guy that got the crap beat out of him. I don't think they found him, but never did see him again. Never FK with a salmon. The English were so scared of them that they were the only race, other than the Gurkhas, that had honorary white status. Source: look at the Australian Constitution, 1912. This woman, Mary the first worked with, was always pleasant and cheerful, said hello in the lunchroom, and was generally liked. She worked in finance in special projects. She said she wanted to retire in a few years, and she had been working there for 15 years. Her boss started pressuring her to complete our annual budget report faster, but this thing is huge and comprehensive, and a figurative beast. Mary told the boss it would be ready in a couple of weeks, per the usual schedule. The boss said that it needed to be completed within 1 week to give to the higher-ups. Mary said it wasn't possible. Boss emailed Mary plus CC a bunch of co-workers and the assistant managers, calling Mary out for a poor work ethic and for making the department look bad. Mary said it wasn't possible and didn't appreciate being bullied. She put in her notice to retire by the end of the week, leaving her boss high and dry. She was the only one who could do the budget report in a timely manner, so the department was double F'd. Good for her. A long time ago, I used to do call center tech support for fairly complex issues. A really nice, quiet guy went through the same training class. He talked if you talked to him, but never went out of his way to chat. Right after training, the call center changes a ton of stuff. We start getting squeezed on the amount of time we can do documentation, how much research time we have, just metrics in general. It was utter bullshit, because the favorites got to go on smoke breaks as often as they wanted with the managers. We'd essentially be punished for that because we had to keep the average numbers in a certain area. He did all the right things. Talked to his manager, talked to their manager, then to HR. It kept getting worse, plus enforced overtime. Then he got a super long call. He was on it at least 2 hours, about a complex issue, and the customer was just straight up abusing him, but he had to take it, because the managers wouldn't give permission for him to hang up. And they were basically screaming at him to resolve this issue, and get to his next call, but we couldn't end calls, the customer had to. One day he just stood up, stepped onto his chair, then onto his desk, threw his headset on the desk, and sort of growled something like "FK this," quietly. He looked around, staring people in the face, especially the people who took those long breaks and the managers. Then he walked out, and no one ever saw him again. Everyone was super quiet and afraid to move or say much of anything. She was an assistant manager, and was known for being soft-spoken. At a manager meeting, one of the general managers, who was known for being a total jackass to everyone, was going off on how every store should be run. Well, she snapped. You have the highest turnover rate out of any store in the district. You can't keep employees for more than 6 months before they just quit, all saying you were the problem. Maybe you should take that advice you're giving us and use it on yourself. Edit. Wow. I didn't expect this to blow up, and thank you so much for the silver. So for anyone who's invested in what happened next, she put in her 2 weeks, not even 3 days later. The manager who she yelled at was transferred to a different location out of that district. The store he managed has since bounced back and has been doing very well. I used to manage a pub in a small rural town, population around 300, in Australia. Running the pub was mostly a business of maintaining the peace between the itinerant oil and gas workers and the local cattle industry families who resented their presence. The flashpoint for this conflict was frequently the jukebox in the bar. The oil and gas guys were usually city folks on fly-in, fly-out rotations, so their musical tastes somewhat differed to the locals. Anyway, so there's a guy we'll call Brian who is the heir apparent to one of the larger cattle empires in the district. Super cool guy, everyone liked him, would give you the shirt of his back sort of thing. Brian had a daughter who just married and was pregnant with her first kid. Sometime during the pregnancy she'd noticed a dodgy looking blemish on her butt, though she figured she'd wait till she had the kid to get it looked at. Months later, she's had the kid, goes to get it checked. Skin cancer, metastasized everywhere. Weeks to live. There's a huge funeral. Brian is destroyed. At the end of the church service there's a procession of vehicles out to the cemetery. Some Halliburton truck, impatient to be caught behind it, plows down the side of the road and spews dust over the whole thing. From then on Brian would be down the pub every other night. He'd get half smashed and then put that F King, If I Die Young song on the jukebox that was popular like 10 years back. Man was circling the drain, but nobody really knew what to do about it. Anyway, one night, Brian's at the bar and the song is on the jukebox. Some guys in Halliburton patched high-vis start bitching about the song choice. I tell them to just leave it be, but one of them gets up and unplugs the jukebox. Brian plugs it back in and puts the song on again. One of the Halliburton guys calls Brian a depressing old cunt. Brian tells him to get F-cat and, well, I don't remember who threw the first punch. But between the fight starting and the couple of seconds it took me to break it up, Brian did enough damage to put the guy in an ambulance. Edit. For those wondering how this all turned out for Brian, there was no trouble with the police because the town didn't even have a police officer at the time, and the gas worker couldn't have his boss knowing he'd been brawling with the locals at the pub. I haven't lived out that way for a couple years, but last I heard Brian was still running the family cattle stations and de facto raising his granddaughter because the son-in-law works FIFO, 3 on and 1 off. An acquaintance of mine, Daryl, was always a quiet kid that bothered nobody. Given that he was 6'5" and 250 pounds, he played football and was generally respected and liked. One day in Spanish class the class clown was making his usual rounds talking shit, until he got to this one girl, Nellie. He never really made fun of people of the other sex, so everyone around him was telling him to FK off, but he kept going, and finally got to the birthmark on her neck that was very large and dark red. He told her that it dropped her a few numbers down. At this point just about everyone, and their grandma in the class, was standing up about to rush him, save for Daryl and a few others, until Daryl got up, waltzed over to the class clown, picked him up by his hair and said, and I quote, "If you don't shut the FK right now I am going to put you through that fucking wall." Points to the nearest wall. He dropped the clown and walked away. A few seconds later, with his band of merry men behind him, the clown tries to jump Darrell in the middle of the class. Darrell then proceeds to elbow him across the room, run over, pick him up by the shoulder, and put his hand through the drywall right next to the clown's head. Security by this point was called, and both Darrell and the clown were arrested, with both only getting off with fines for damages. Every day, the spackle patch where the hole used to be humbles me every day. One of my middle school friends, whom we'll call Bob, was about a half-foot shorter than everyone else. Everyone was around 5 feet. He was an interesting, in a good way, dude. Interested in learning, played video games, was great to hang out with. But he looked scrawny. Didn't look like he could hurt anything, if I'm being honest. For some context to the story, our gym teacher gave nicknames, some good, some bad, to everyone. He was always sarcastic. Always berating everyone, speaking down to us instead of encouraging them. One day the gym teacher says something about Bob's mom. Which Bob's mom had fibromyalgia and some other conditions making her weak and unhealthy, not by choice. And something in Bob snapped. Bob completely took down this 6.5 feet monster gym teacher. Gym teacher looked like he stood no chance at that time. They were quickly pulled apart and Bob got expelled and had to move school, while the gym teacher was fired for fighting a student and being an overall AOA. Edit. Or my first silver, thank you. Older brother's wedding. He's a very nice guy, almost too nice. He had a horrible girlfriend. He adored her though. She told him that he wasn't good enough and that she would break up with him unless he bought her this super fancy ring and married her. He did. His wedding was very stressful, and she was extra nasty. After they cut the cake, she got herself a huge slice and left him with none, telling him he should go on a diet. For context, he was underweight. He was working his way up to average. He snapped, threw a handful of cake at her pretty dress and hair, then told her to expect her papers to sign. He proceeded to scream, cry, and rant about how horrible she was and how she made him suicidal. He's better now. They split up and live in different continents. Sorry for bad grammar and typos, I'm on mobile. Also sorry for flaws in the story, this was quite a while ago.